It was supposed to be a routine stop, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Officer Daniels tried to check the ID of a suspect who refused to comply, things took a sudden turn. What started as a simple request quickly escalated into something much more intense, catching everyone off guard. Officer Daniels, usually calm and composed, found herself taking action faster than she anticipated. In that split second, her training kicked in, and before she knew it, she was in a physical confrontation. But as the situation spiraled out of control, regret started to settle in. Was it too much, too soon? As the suspect pushed back and tensions rose, Officer Daniels had to question everything: her instincts, her decisions, and the very reason behind the refusal. Was there more to this than just a simple ID check? Stay tuned to see how this intense situation unfolds and whether the aftermath will change everything for her. As Officer Daniels struggled to regain control, the suspect's eyes revealed something unsettling: defiance, yes, but also fear. It wasn't the usual cocky attitude she encountered during routine stops. Her gut told her there was more to the story. Maybe it wasn't just about the refusal to show ID. Maybe this person was hiding something bigger. Her partner, Officer Reed, stood a few steps away, unsure whether to intervene. The tension between them was palpable. They'd been through dozens of situations like this, but something felt different this time. Daniels could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure building as she weighed her next move. Was it worth escalating further? Would it make the situation worse? As the minutes ticked by, the silence between them felt deafening. In the distance, the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, adding to the growing uncertainty. What were they walking into? Officer Daniels' mind raced. She could see the conflict was intensifying, but every move she made seemed to push the situation further into chaos. The suspect's body language was all wrong: too defensive, too stiff, almost like they were preparing for something far more dangerous than a routine stop. Was it just nerves? Or was there something she wasn't seeing? Reed's voice broke through the tension. "Daniels, we need to back off." He sounded hesitant, almost apologetic, but his eyes were wide, scanning the area. He knew something wasn't right, but they'd been taught never to show doubt in the field. Still, he was giving her space to breathe, to think. Daniels appreciated that, but it also added pressure. She couldn't back down now, not when the situation was already escalating. The suspect's eyes darted nervously around, and Daniels caught a glimpse of something in their pocket. It was too quick to be certain, but it looked like the handle of a knife, or worse, a weapon. Instantly, her hand hovered over her own sidearm, her breath steady, but her heart pounding in her chest. Was it too soon to make that call? A voice from behind suddenly yelled, "Hands where I can see them." The shout came from a third officer who had just arrived on the scene. But as the newcomer stepped forward, the suspect made a swift, sharp movement, causing Daniel's pulse to spike. Everything froze for a split second. The sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of backup. But was it enough? Could they contain the growing tension before things spiraled out of control? The unknown loomed just ahead, and in the pit of her stomach, Daniels knew the next moments would change everything. The suspect's sudden movement sent a chill through the air. Daniels' instincts screamed at her, but she couldn't act yet. Not with backup arriving and the whole situation still hanging by a thread. Every second felt like an eternity. The suspect's hand slowly shifted towards their pocket, and in that fleeting moment, Daniels made her decision. "Stop, Daunt," she shouted, voice sharp, but it was already too late. In one swift motion, the suspect pulled out whatever was hidden in their pocket, and the crowd of officers tensed, waiting for the worst. But it wasn't a weapon. Instead, the suspect revealed a small, crumpled piece of paper. Confusion rippled through the group. Daniels blinked, heart still racing, unsure of how to react. Was this some kind of trick? The suspect's hand trembled as they held the paper out, refusing to make eye contact. Reed stepped forward cautiously, his eyes narrowing at the paper. "What is this?" he asked, but the suspect remained silent. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating even. Daniels could feel her pulse in her temples. Was this all a game? Was it an attempt to manipulate the situation? But then her eyes locked on the paper. There was something scribbled on it, a few hurried words. She could barely make out the handwriting, but the message seemed urgent. Her mind raced, trying to process the sudden shift in everything. "Take a look at this," Reed muttered under his breath. He handed the paper to Daniels, who hesitated, a cold knot forming in her stomach. What was it that had sent the suspect into such a panic? The sirens were louder now, almost deafening, and officers moved in closer, but none of them dared to make a move. Daniels slowly unfolded the paper. She read the words, and a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. It wasn't what she'd expected. But just as she was about to speak, a shout broke the silence. "Move in now." The order came from a commanding officer, and chaos erupted all around them. What had just been a routine stop was quickly spiraling into something far more dangerous. And Daniel's heart raced as she realized the moment she'd been dreading had arrived. The command to move in now seemed to shatter the fragile calm that had briefly settled over the scene. Officers rushed forward, their radios crackling with urgency, their boots pounding against the pavement. But just as they closed in, something unexpected happened. The suspect, still shaking, suddenly turned and sprinted toward the alleyway, disappearing into the darkness. It was as if the entire situation had been a diversion, a calculated move to buy them just enough time to escape. Daniels froze for a second, the paper still clenched in her hand, the urgency of the moment pulling her in two directions. Should she chase after the suspect? Or should she focus on what was in her hand? The thing that might hold the answers they were all desperate to uncover. Before she could make a decision, Reed's voice broke through the chaos. "Daniels, get after them," he shouted, his voice sharp with concern. But as she took a step forward, something caught her eye. A second officer, standing near the edge of the crowd, looked suspiciously calm. Almost too calm. Their posture, their lack of urgency in the middle of the frenzy, it was off. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could someone on their team be involved in this? The thought hit her like a brick, and she hesitated, torn between pursuing the suspect and confronting this new, unsettling possibility. Without warning, the officer turned and vanished into the crowd, making their way toward the alley where the suspect had fled. Daniel's instincts kicked into overdrive. She couldn't trust anyone now, not even the officers she'd worked beside for years. The stakes had just been raised, and everything she thought she knew about the situation was suddenly up for question. Was the suspect the only one hiding something? Or had they been lured into a trap set by someone much closer to home? Daniel's grip tightened on the paper, the cryptic words burning in her mind. She knew one thing for sure. The game had changed, and now no one was safe. Daniels didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the alley, her heart pounding in her chest. The suspect had a head start, but with the crowd now dissipating, she had a clear shot. She pushed through the fear, through the uncertainty, focusing only on the task ahead. As she reached the entrance of the alley, the cold night air hit her, sending a shiver down her spine. There, standing in the dim light at the far end, was the suspect. But they weren't alone. The officer she'd seen earlier, the one who had acted so strangely, was there too. They were talking, their voices low but urgent. The suspect, now fully aware of Daniel's presence, turned quickly, hands raised in a defensive gesture. But it wasn't the suspect that caught Daniel's attention. It was the officer, the one who had been so calm, so detached. Daniels could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. The twist, the betrayal, it was all too much. She'd worked with this officer before, trusted them in situations just like this. But now, as they exchanged some inaudible words with the suspect, it was clear. The betrayal ran deep. The officer wasn't just a bystander. They were involved. They were the one who'd orchestrated the entire thing. "Stop," Daniels shouted, her voice breaking through the tension. The officer turned, their expression unreadable. "What are you doing, Daniels?" The officer's voice was cold, but there was an edge to it. They didn't even flinch at the accusation. "You've been working with them, haven't you?" Daniel's words hit like a punch. Her hand hovered over her weapon, but she couldn't bring herself to draw it. The paper, still crumpled in her grip, felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just about the suspect anymore. It was about something much bigger, an internal threat that had been hiding in plain sight. The officers stepped back, their hand inching toward their own gun. "You don't understand," they murmured, as if trying to explain away the betrayal. But it was too late. The suspect was already running again, disappearing deeper into the shadows. Daniels lunged forward instinctively, but the officer's gunshot rang out just as her fingers grazed the suspect's jacket. Everything slowed. Daniels heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Reed, his face pale, had finally caught up, but it was too late. The officer who'd betrayed them dropped the gun, hands raised in surrender, their face twisted in something between fear and regret. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The final twist came as the suspect, now cornered by another unit, revealed something that took everyone by surprise. The piece of paper Daniels had been clutching, it wasn't just a note, it was evidence. Real evidence that implicated several high-ranking officers, not just the ones standing before her. The scheme, the corruption, it ran deep, and the entire department was compromised. Daniels felt a sinking realization in her gut. She hadn't just uncovered one betrayal. She'd uncovered a network of them. The stakes had been far higher than anyone could have imagined. As the suspect was taken into custody and the traitor led away in handcuffs, Daniels stood still, her mind spinning. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. As dawn broke over the city, the weight of the night's events still hung heavy. Daniels stood in the quiet aftermath, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer enormity of what had just unfolded. The corrupt officers had been taken into custody, but the real battle was only beginning. The department would need to rebuild from the ground up. Trust, once shattered, wouldn't be easily restored. Reed walked over, offering a silent nod of solidarity. They didn't need words. They both knew the cost of justice and how much it had taken to get here. Daniels looked at the crumpled paper one last time. It had been the key, but it was just a small part of a much bigger story, one that would now be exposed to the world. The city wasn't the same as it had been the day before, and neither was Daniels. She learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the fight for justice wasn't just about what you find. It's about what you're willing to lose.